Hey everybody, it's Ken McElroy here. I'm here with my very, very good friend, Phil Heinrich. Phil?
Hey, nice to be here, Ken.
So you guys don't know, but real estate, everybody knows real estate, but they don't often think about agriculture. You know, what they do is they think of single family, they think of commercial office or self-storage or multifamily, which is what I do. We obviously talk a lot about that. And when you're looking at income producing property, you know, dirt, building, rent, you know, but this is very, very different. So I'm excited to have Phil on. He is a good friend of mine, and we're going to talk about the 5 things that he looks for in finding agriculture property. Welcome, Phil.
Hey, nice to be here.
So the first thing that I just want to point out that I found really fascinating is no different from when your guys are looking at real estate. You have to have the end in mind, right?
Exactly.
If you don't, guys, you're screwed. In other words, you know, before I buy a property, in every single case, I know exactly what I'm going to do with it and when I'm out, right?
Well, that's a great idea.
You have to know if you're using your money or somebody else's money, and you have to have a plan from beginning to end, even if it doesn't work out. You have to have a plan, and that's the way you raise money too. Because people want to know, you know, what's the finish?
Yep.
Right? So that's the biggest thing. So let's jump right in, Phil. What are the 5 things? What's the first thing that people would look for, you know, in looking for agricultural land? Because I know kind of at the tail end of this last cycle, ag land is kind of in favor now. It's competitive.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
It's hot right now. And in fact, it's hard to get your hands on. And so, you know, basically, the buyer knows what he's looking for. It's not like you have to introduce that to him. Right. You know, the buyer calls us when they see what they are looking for. So very first thing we always talk about is, hey, you know, it's your first visit. How does the place look to you?
Yeah, so right. So just like anything, you go out to the property, you take a look at it. And what are some of the things in the visit that might go to the next thing? What are you looking for?
Well, let's talk about the medium-sized farmer that's looking for maybe a couple hundred acres to fit his portfolio. You know, in that, the first thing he's going to look at is, where is urban life? Okay, we got to keep chemicals away from the urban people. That's always going to rear its head up. How fast is it growing? So that comes into a number that I always think about as zoning.
Oh, sure. Right. So the next thing, and just like, you know, when I'm trying to buy a piece of property, I'll buy it subject to zoning, right?
Yep.
So what kind of zoning, what are you looking for from an ag standpoint for zoning specifically?
Okay. So you've done something that I've never done. I've never taken R1 and made it agriculture. Okay.
Yeah,
you know,
it's always the other way.
I can see R1 and you made it apartments, right, but you worked hard to do that.
Yeah. It was like, we're going to rip down a building and plant it.
Yeah. So the very first thing we want to look for is something that is agriculture, light industrial, or heavy industrial.
Okay.
Because then it falls back to what Ken said, you know, your end goal. You know, you got to have an escape plan. And, you know, in zoning, it's easy to go to residential, but it's harder to go into the heavy industrial.
Right. So what that means is you might find a piece of land that you like, and it might be zoned light industrial, but that's not going to work for you.
No. And, you know, let's just use that as an example, because when it's light industrial, the first thing I want to look at the logistics. Is there a good highway going by? Is there truck traffic that could be worked? Because we might be looking at it for a processing facility, you know, that piece of dirt. Now, on the farming side of it, they would like to be, you know, a hands away approach, just so they stay away from the urban life a little bit, but they need to be zoned agriculture.
Right. So as you guys are zooming down these highways through these farmlands, or even not, and you see things of these interchanges, and you see like truck stops and all that stuff, that's all zoned. Those corners are zoned. You know, the city, the county knows what they want on those things, right?
Exactly. And, you know, my father, I always asked my dad, I said, how do you know what land you want? And he goes, son, it's easy. He goes, I only want what's next to me. So, you know, now,
awesome.
Hey, you know, that's at least he can drive there every day, right?
Yeah,
but,
that's true.
You know, where you're a little bit more out there that goes to different states. Well, guess what? I caught the same bug. And as I go by and I'm driving, and what catches my eye is, do I always like the small little farm? That sometimes you can't get your hands on because it's 5 to 10 acres and it can find something. What we look for is old homesteads that might have water rights sitting on it too.
Right. So which is the next thing?
Okay.
So the first one is visit. Second one is zoning. Third one is water rights. So that resort I bought in Sedona.
Okay.
So I don't know if I told you this, but the reason I bought it was because it came with water rights that predated Arizona.
Oh man.
As a state.
Okay.
So I was like, that is why I drove there. It wasn't for the resort.
Yeah.
Even though the resort was producing money, I was like, are you kidding me? Like, you just don't see water rights, especially where I'm from, in a lot of these urban areas, they're gone. Right.
Exactly.
And so water rights are very, very, it's, I talked to a friend of mine. He said, it's next century's gold.
It is.
Water rights are big. And so let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, there's a lot of property out there that can be as simplified as just a component to take care of your 30, 40 gallon needs, where a farmer would just need water to run the place and keep it going without having to go to town. The next opportunity is does he have any water rights that he can drill a well or has existing permits? Okay. So we always research that before we approach. So when we do our research, we check water rights. We check if there's anything still on the table of having a permit, and then can we re-permit? And boy, I'll tell you what, you get into some states and re-permitting it can drain your wallet chasing it.
Yeah, guys, water's expensive. And I'll tell you something, it's highly regulated.
Absolutely.
And if, this is not something to mess around with, because, you have a certain allocation on land, right?
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things I was laughing about, I was watching that show Yellowstone,
Yes.
and the whole thing was over water rights. There was a casino, and there was, this big ranch, and there was all kinds of stuff going on, and it's just exactly what happens today.
Yeah. I guess you got the educated buyer, then you got the naive buyer. And a lot of times the naive buyer really has the desire to purchase, but these type of things that we're talking about catch them off guard, and then it makes them start backpedaling.
Yes.
So,
well, the other thing that I found is sometimes you can tie up a property and then you can work through the water rights and make it more valuable, right?
That'll lead into that next question.
Yes.
Which
is who used it last?
Who used
Number
it last?
4.
Who used it last? I mean, sometimes they went big and had to go home, and they've got a lot of opportunity there.
And by the way, that's usually management.
That is management.
Right? So what they did is they bought the land, they put in this infrastructure, they got through the water rights, and then what happened is they couldn't pull it off.
No.
And a bunch of money was lost.
And we fall into that supply and demand, but let's just go with everything's going well. The farmer sees the opportunity. He drills a well. He gets down there 300 feet and has got all the water he wants. And when I say that, I'm going to throw a number at you. You're doing your yard, folks, with 15 to 20 gallons an hour, okay? Adequate. We're talking 800 to 1,800 gallons a minute, okay? That's what we have to have.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. And I might want to stand corrected. That's 15 to 20 gallons a minute on your yard, okay, at your house. And we're talking 800 to 1,800. And we might be down 2,200 feet.
Oh, wow. So the cost of that well is, by the way, that's a very expensive well.
Actually, it's a moderate sized well. With cold water and not salty water and just a really good area. Now, back to who used it last, you can look over your shoulder and it could have been the neighbor. Maybe the neighbor was renting it, and you look at his farm, and if he was renting it, then you turn around and you look how he's farming, okay? And you can see his practices. The next other thing is there's been a lot of government programs where this ground has sat in CRP, Conservation Reserve Program, and it might have dynamite water rights right underneath it. So
yeah, it's a big deal, guys. And the other thing that I learned is also, on who used it last. I've come up, on areas that you would never guess there was a gas station there.
Oh,
which is not good, right? Because of the storage tanks. In the old school way, they used to pull up and put all the gas below the ground, and they had these old metal storage tanks, in a lot of cases, didn't particularly make it. And so then you have, this, underground, spillage. And then all of a sudden that is toxic. And the only way now you have to clean that up, if you can even clean it up. Right. So that's why this who used it last is very, very important.
Oh, yeah. And you can get really excited because it could have been a great person and you might pay a little bit more. But from what Kenny mentioned, gas stations, laundromats, you want to talk about a tight, isolated piece of property that can be contaminated. A farmer can contaminate also. But I'm going to tell you right now, they're usually very good stewards. So, it's back to the principle of who was there last.
But things have changed over the years, Like we bought a piece of property in Portland, Oregon, and it was on the Willamette River, it runs right through the city. And it had an old railroad spur back in the day. And they used to pull these railroad cars in there, and they would work on them. And they, of course,
oh boy,
dump everything right in there, right on the river, right? And it was on a bulkhead. And then they asphalted over it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So over the years, it had all this toxic stuff that when we went to look at the time was an apartment building on the top of it, they were like, the lenders jump in. They went to phase 1, which is, the environmental, then phase 2, and then phase 3, which was testing and all that stuff. And we actually ended up having to put an insurance policy around it and all these things because they were concerned.
Yeah. Urban development definitely has a lot more eyes. We don't have as many eyes on us, but anytime you get close to the highways or the urban life, property gets more expensive in one sense, but it's not as desirable.
Right. I know in Phoenix, we had Motorola. And underneath the ground, if you can just Google this, you'll see they had what's called the Superfund. And where Motorola during the day was dumping stuff into the ground, and it was going out like this, for miles, just over the years, right? And so if you're buying something in that area, which is a lot of it's ag, you could get caught with this, if you just, like you said, the naive buyer just buys this and they don't know. It's very, very, very important they understand who was on that property before.
Yeah. Those are markets that, and you talk about Arizona, it definitely has it's a river. If it rained and rained and rained, Scottsdale is going to be underwater. That's not probably true, but you can go through a dry river and the next time the river rains, up comes the water. So it's shallow.
Well, also you got these old manufacturers, you guys have all seen the TV shows and stuff where they dumped into the rivers and right?
Yeah.
It does make its way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's important to know, I think, that you're what you're buying. And so the last thing, number 5, is size. We talk about size. So obviously this is where the reason you're looking at size is because that's for the payout, right?
When when you're out there shopping for farmland of some sort, you're going to get an opportunity to understand it. Study all pieces because you can look at stuff that's 50 to 200 acres at a shot. Opportunity to break it up a little bit. You can look at it that way and pick your neighbors. So that seems to have a little bit of friendliness to it. Then you go to the next size, 500 to 1,000. Hey, that's an audience in itself. Okay. And I don't recommend that to too many people unless it's an investment side where they just want to be the landlord. Okay. And they can get themselves a good tenant. And when you're doing that, look at your neighbor. Because if it's a friendly neighbor and you can keep your fields close to his, that's a great relationship. Then you get into the supersize that we're talking the 10 to 30,000 acres. Well, you know what? Typically, there isn't that much ground in one piece that's completely quality. So you're going to have to take the good and the bad. And those type of things we're seeing very interesting today. You know, when we're buying dirt, talking about using a realtor or talking to myself, you know what? The auction business is taking on real estate.
Yeah.
And it's been a lot of fun to focus that way. And unfortunately, it used to be the good old days when we'd walk in and we'd see the three guys with hats on and we'd be the fourth. We'd know our audience. Shoot, now we go on and we're standing there and the first thing we ask, how many are online? 42,000. It's 28,000. I mean, all of a sudden, you know what? Being there to see it is one thing, but knowing your audience, you won't.
Right. Yeah. Well, you skipped over something I thought was really interesting, guys. So what he basically said is if you want to buy 500 or 1,000 acres, take a look at the tenant next door, right?
Yes.
And see if they want to expand. So you buy the land and then you cut a deal with the person next door to pay for the land.
You bet.
Right? So it's the same thing. It's just done with ag. A lot of people don't see that. You know, I mean, I drive by these farms and I'm like, oh my gosh, you think that they own them, but sometimes they don't.
No, and you know what? It's generational, passed on, and they're not farmers. They're urban people now. And so those type of investments I encourage because it's good for the farmers. And, you know, they don't have to outlay the cash. You got a tax advantage out there for yourself. And you can also control your expenses and know your income.
Yeah, so I bought some land. I don't know if I told you this, out in the Teton Valley. It was 1,000 acres, and we bought 200 of it, and we kept it ag, and then we make a little money. The guy farms it and leases it back from us, and we were going to develop it over time, and then the Teton Valley said, no more development, which is fine.
Okay.
But we still have a little bit of cash flow coming from it, and it's ag. So we didn't change it. We just kept it the way it was, and it's part of his 1,000 acres. So you can do this. I've seen, I'm doing this right now.
Yeah.
Right.
And what's kind of the fun thing about owning a farm is in today's environment, you can take on as much as you want to do on that farm. If it's fence fixing, if it's building repairs, or keeping it tight, or if it's a reunion place for your family because you were a farm boy and you want to bring that back to the family, I encourage it because the American farmer today doesn't have the money every year to just keep buying thousands of acres, but they do have the ability to be a good tenant and to rent back, and cash rents do go up.
Yeah, it's a really, really good point. So, Bino, thanks. As always, you're the best.
You got it. Glad to be here.
Top 5 reasons or top 5 things to look for when you're buying ag property. Thanks, bud.
You bet. Thank you.